Game for the Cincinnati Bengals for all of the wrong reasons, and it was an absolutely miserable Sunday. I was sitting there reminding myself of, and I'm dating myself here, 1995, 1998, 99, 2000. I just was sitting there Sunday saying, this is just a joke. Has to be a joke. But we're going to talk about that. The Bengals getting absolutely steamrolled by the Minnesota Vikings and still are historically winless in Minnesota against the Vikings. And we'll talk about, is this a trend or is this just a blip in the radar because it was a transition week, all of that kind of stuff. And then, yes, ladies and gentlemen, we will be talking about Zach Taylor. We're just going to air out some thoughts and obviously a lot to talk about for all of the wrong reasons. Bengals are still 2-1. They are still ahead of the curve, at least for them historically under Zach Taylor. I am Anthony Cosenza. He is John Sheeran. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network and the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. You can get this show and a variety of others on the Believe in Cincy podcast channel through your favorite audio streamer, whether that be iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, all the major ones. You can find us there. And or if you like the video side of things, you can catch our live streams or streams after the fact on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@BengalsOBI. So pretty simple there. Check us out, subscribe, and do all the things there. If you like our videos, let us know. We appreciate that. Go check out a recent interview we did with Sam Hubbard too. That was a lot of fun. And of course, you can also catch the streams on a number of different X platforms and on the Cincy Jungle Facebook page. But oh boy, a lot to talk about. And by the way, this show is brought to you. I shouldn't say by the way, like as a sidebar, but it is brought to you in part by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and FOCO, the fans only company. A company that has a lot of exclusive Bengals merch. Those are both linked in our show bio, so go check those out. But, John, I've been chattering too much here to open the show. Holy moly, my friend. This was a debacle of epic proportions that we watched on Sunday.
It reminded me about how ridiculous it is to, when we predict the season in like May, and how I'm sure we talked about the idea of them being 2-1 at this point. And of course, we had no idea it would look exactly like this, which is why anything that we say in May needs to be taken with the largest grain of salt, because the Bengals are 2-1. And I don't think that the fan base has felt this uniquely dejected since the years that you were probably referring to 30 years ago. And this is now stringing together back-to-back seasons when the season just looks completely bleak after 3 weeks. But of course, they have more wins than losses. And now they're 7.5-point underdogs in week 4 against a team with a quarterback that is terrible against pressure. Like it's so mind-bogglingly unpredictable about how the first 21 days of this season has gone. I'm stunned. I'm like, what happened yesterday was just simply a comedy of errors. I don't know how else you can describe it, but I guess we're going to do our best for the next 45 minutes.
We're going to do our best. Now let's we can kind of go chronologically, but there's a lot of it's going to be about the first half, because at that point things got way out of reach. And believe it or not, for those who did not watch the game, there was a point, even when the Bengals were down 2 possessions, that this game was well within reach to make it competitive, to make it close, to make it whatever. And they just tripping over their own feet doesn't even do it justice what they did. I mean, and I put this tweet out. I think the most maddening thing to me was that some of the mistakes were made by some of their superstars and or tenured veterans, guys that just do not make these mistakes, and guys that were brought in because they are sure-handed, that sort of thing. But it started off poorly in a number of different regards. The Vikings had the ball first. Carson Wentz, of course, the backup quarterback, but we know he's been at times a good starter, at times a not so good starter, but he looked pretty sharp at points, but he got a little help from the referees on that opening drive. At one point, there were 2 plays and 3 penalties were called, the first 2 plays, which was like, okay, well, here we go with that. But nevertheless, the Bengals defense allowed them to march down the field with those penalties, score an opening touchdown. Not a good sign, but okay, well, let's see. Jake Browning, he's been here before. I don't know. Maybe the Bengals. And so quietly, the Bengals just kind of went away. And at one point, it was 17-3, John. And even though the Bengals were kind of still able to maybe strike it, get some points before half, get the ball out of half, an absolute avalanche of errors occurred, and one of which I should have prefaced, one of those touchdowns to get to 17-3 was a Browning pick 6.
Yeah, I mean, all 5 turnovers happened on like the Vikings side of the field too. So like not only did I think 31 points come off of those 5 turnovers, but points were taken off the board like right in front of the Bengals. And that's why I understand when Zach was up there saying that like turnovers are the story of the game. You obviously can't win if you commit 5 turnovers and you don't have at least 5 come back your way, right? It's just the imbalance of the game.
Or 3. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's like that is the story of the game at the end of the day. And like when we were all just kind of reeling like what is happening, of course, then you have a Jamar Chase fumble, then you have a Samaje Perine fumble, and it just kept coming. There was 3 fumbles in a span of 4 plays. I'm not even sure that's ever happened before in the history of the NFL, but it happened there. And of course, 2 of them were returned for touchdowns by the same dude. It's like what we saw was historical in obviously amazing ways for Minnesota and absolutely terrible ways for the Bengals. There's never been a loss this bad, which I find a little bit surprising. I'm surprised there hasn't been a 38-point or worse loss in the history of the 58-year history of the Bengals, in which a lot of those years haven't been particularly kind. But you're right. Like it was not ideal the way that it started, but I think after 2 weeks, you expected this defense to kind of find themselves as the game kind of goes on. And that was kind of what we were seeing a little bit. Like you were starting to see Wentz rattled because that offensive line was still dealing with Christian Darrisaw coming back for the first time, a backup center in for Ryan Kelly, who was clearly having some issues getting the snap off. They had like a handful of false starts in their own stadium. He was not handling pressure well. So the defensive line was doing what it needed to do to keep the defense in the game and to keep the team in the game. But you see 48 points on the board, and you're thinking, okay, the defense played terrible. That obviously wasn't the case. They were put in terrible situation after terrible situation. And yeah, you're right. Like 17-3 is not great, but it's possible for the Bengals to just come back from that if they just had their brains attached to the rest of their bodies. And that just wasn't the case. Like the offense completely made fundamental mistakes that just put the game out of reach in a way that, again, we have never seen before. So I really don't know where to take this conversation other than what were the last 4 or 5 days like in that locker room preparing for this game. What was the mentality about this game after Burrow gets hurt? Being in the situation before when Browning was taking over, like this isn't brand new to them. Like a lot of the players on this team were a part of that 2023 team when they went through this the first time, which I think makes this even more damning about like a performance of this magnitude of badness is just beyond inexcusable, especially considering the fact that they've been in this exact situation before.
they've been in the situation before. They are across the board. They're a bit more experienced. Again, just to go back to the defense, you look at it and you go 48 points. Oh, the defense, of course, is being the Bengals defense. Well, 2 of those were defensive touchdowns. And like you said, there were 5 total turnovers committed by the offense. That is not, it was not a good day by the defense, but they were continuously put in just obscene situations on that side of the ball. So, yeah, and kudos to Isaiah Rodgers, by the way, who had just the game of his life. 2 returns for touchdowns, another forced fumble, and one was a pick six and all that kind of stuff. But I guess what's funny is there were elements that we talked about that we thought that the Bengals would need to be successful, not only this week, but going ahead with Jake Browning. And we saw actually a little bit of that. There was usage of tight ends, and Fant had some spots early where he was making some plays, that sort of thing. Of course, he had an egregious fumble that ended up, I think he was the first one, right? That ended up kind of snowballing things out of control from there. It was him, then Chase, then Pirine. And so again, though, those are veteran guys. Pirine is known as a sure-handed guy. Chase hasn't fumbled in 2 seasons basically. So these are just kind of like, what the hell kind of moments for this team. But I still go back to, and this is going to be part of the Zach Taylor conversation about what you just mentioned, the preparation throughout the week, the mindset throughout the week. I know it is a transition week, so that's difficult, but we're going to talk about that a little later. In your eyes, John, I know point differential wise, this is the worst loss in Bengals team history, like you mentioned, and it was by a point, right? I vividly remember one of them. I think it was that 37-0 game against the Ravens where Akili Smith got knocked out of that. I mean, it was just a mess of a game. Was this the worst game you've ever seen the Bengals play?
Oh man, that's tough. I actually kind of feel like 2018 comes to mind when they lost to the Saints by 37. I believe that was the game that either should have gotten Terrell Lawson fired or did get him fired that season. Obviously, it was Marvin's last year, but yeah, like the Saints did whatever they wanted offensively, and it wasn't just like the Bengals making mistakes. It was just like a total team just being lost within themselves. This did snowball out of control because of, again, the unprecedented string of turnovers. I will say though, again, like I think this performance is damning in the sense of like we saw 2 years ago when Browning's first started against the Steelers, that offense was incompetent. They couldn't do anything against the Steelers. It was still relatively close because the Steelers offense wasn't particularly impressive, but that was not a very promising game in terms of how the rest of that season would go. And then they obviously turned things around. They didn't, even at 2-0, they didn't have any excuse to come out of the gates that flat. And they came out even worse because offensively, the reason why this game stands out is because we have seen over the last 9 years terrible offensive lines. I don't think I've been this disappointed in an offensive line, considering what they should be and what they ended up being in this game. Minnesota has obviously a great defensive front. They're well coached by Brian Flores. I've never seen them get driven off the ball in run blocking to that extent. It was an abysmal performance from that entire group, where like only Amarius Mims kind of stood out in some ways, but everything bad about the offensive line in terms of what people feared it could be, it showed itself. And that's why the offense couldn't function worth a damn. Like Jake Browning obviously didn't play particularly well, but I don't think he necessarily had a chance running for his life. Obviously, Chase Brown didn't have a chance running behind any holes that were non-existent. You can't run for 3 yards on 10 carries and just put it all on the running back. Obviously, there are much larger problems with that. So the reason why this is so disappointing is because that offensive line should not be this bad, and they are significantly worse than I could have possibly dreamt about.
Yep. And it was, the tackles weren't immune either. Orlando Brown was behind on a couple of snaps in protection, but also that interior of the offensive line just was not playing well in a number of regards. And then Fairchild, who's been arguably the most solid of the group, had a crucial holding penalty that negated a big play for the Bengals as well when they were trying to chip away at that Minnesota lead. And so it just was like you said, a comedy of errors. Like it was very few were immune. I do want to point out too that I mentioned mentioned the tight ends that were involved, particularly Fant early that we mentioned as a key. I also think that the interior, some players on the defensive line that we are looking to shine. Chris Jenkins Jr. had 1.5 sacks. Miles Murphy made a couple of nice plays as well. So that you do like to see on that side of the ball, and those were early to get the team off the field and again potentially chip away at the lead, but it just never ever happened. And obviously a garbage time touchdown made it even better looking than it was throughout most of the game, but a lot of questions remain right now for the Bengals and a lot of concern. I think a lot of people, us as well, thought, even if the Bengals fell down to a lead like a 17-3 in Minnesota, we've seen Browning come back from those leads and either just barely lose it or, come back and show some magic and barely squeak out that win. He had 2 overtime wins when in his 7 starts when he last took over for Burrow, but it just I don't know. Again, it's where was the mindset? Was it just the transition week and all of that? And I think that transitions nicely to what we're going to talk about next. Is this an outlier, a blip in the radar? Is this something that just was like, hey, this was just a rough week. We, emotionally with Burrow being out and all of that and trying to tweak the offense. Like you said, they had that clunker against the Steelers, although it was only a 6-point loss that first start that Browning had, but you could tell that the offense was completely out of sync. Was it that? Was it a combination of going up against an aggressive and creative Brian Flores defense and just trying to get your feet under you and it just snowballed and people's heads are all over the place? Or is this now because, like you said, there are troubles on the offensive line, there are troubles in the run game, and then, of course, uncharacteristic turnovers, especially under Zach Taylor, uncharacteristic turnovers that were committed in this game. So is this now something to be worried about long-term? Is this, or in your estimation, is this just kind of a one-off type of scenario?
So fumbles can be tricky. Turnovers in general can be tricky. I think the theme of this first 3 weeks is just how you can't rely on turnovers because they can just bite you in the ass if you don't get them, because they essentially went to 2-0 because of their turnover luck. And obviously they essentially reaped what they sowed, right? So, I mean, they could have some weeks where they just don't take care of the football, but 5 turnovers is probably not going to happen again. Fingers crossed. So
right.
I think we can agree that that's not like an emerging trend. I do think that the Bengals are completely outcoached in this game. I think Kevin O'Connell is one of the best head coaches in the NFL. Brian Flores is one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL. Probably together, it's the best offensive and defensive play calling tandem in the NFL, and the Bengals were just outclassed in that regard. So that is something to be wary of. Even still then, I will still give this offensive staff the benefit of the doubt to turn it around with Browning because they did it before after a clunker of a week, and they could presumably do it again. Maybe hard against the Denver Broncos next week of a really good defense, but that's a discussion for later, right? So I'm not sure that's yet a trend. I don't know how this run game gets better because they don't have the horses up front. They don't have the athleticism up front to win with power. They don't have the they don't have power. They don't have movement ability, so they can't just spam zone. They need to get creative on a level that I don't think they're capable of being, because I don't think Scott Peters is necessarily proven as a mastermind in the run game. His whole billing, right, is being proficient in pass protection techniques. I don't know what their identity is in terms of running the football. It used to just be running out of the shotgun with these gap schemes and Burrows in there, but you want to change things up because you want to do things differently with Browning. I don't know what they can do in terms of stimulating a run game. They had all offseason to think about this because the personnel in terms of running the football is not different. But I don't know. They don't have a single scheme that they can rely on, and they can run efficiently. There were multiple times they just left the nose tackle unblocked. It was a trap block, but the trap block was just Chase Brown taking on the block, and he had the ball in his hands. It's just like there's nothing to build off with this run game. And if you have a backup quarterback in there that you don't want throwing the ball 40 times, I don't know how you can combat that. So that is definitely on coaching, but it's also just a lack of tender love and care to the personnel just actually getting this phase of the offense going.
That's a great point. So I'm with you on. I think of course I think a 48-10 5 turnover game is an anomaly. I'm completely with you on the running game because the whole point in tweaking the offense with Jake Browning coming in for Joe Burrow is to run the ball a little bit more, use play action, use QB waggles, bootlegs, all that kind of stuff, and be able to do that effectively. And they are not able to do that because they cannot establish the run. And it's not going to get much easier next week because they go up against a very good Broncos defense. So, like you said, I don't know how they fix it, and that's what worries me long term. The other element that worries me long term, not only the 5 turnovers this week, 3 the week prior, and your quarterback is responsible for 5 of them. Yeah. So 8 in 6 quarters of play, and 2 of which have been returned for touchdowns. And while 5 turnovers a game is not sustainable, right now they're averaging 4 a game with Browning in the lineup. So if you want to paint this in rose-colored glasses and that sort of thing, that's fine. I do think, again, 3 fumbles and 4 offensive snaps, like that just like kind of never happens. But the Bengals are being careless with the football right now. Browning is being careless with the football right now, and they are costing themselves big plays, point opportunities, that sort of thing.
Yeah, they need to figure out a way to just generate easy yards. They were so good at that during that 3-game winning stretch that Browning had in 2023, and it never materialized against Minnesota. Obviously, again, a well-coached defense and a defense that disguises what it wants to do, but like it just, even when the game was in like a neutral game script, it just looks so difficult for them to move the ball and for Browning to get comfortable in and out of the pocket. So like, again, I think you just optimistically, you chalk that up to it's his first start. There was probably some emotions of just being back in Minnesota for the first time. He downplayed it. I think he was lying through his teeth when he downplayed it a little bit. So you can take all of that and you can kind of run with it and you can just reset, right? But it's still on the coaching staff and still on Browning to get right and to manufacture that efficiency that you're able to do with, frankly, 2023 had a worse version of the offensive line, right? You had a more inexperienced Chase Brown who was being thrusted in as a starter. You should be better than this. So again, like the turnovers be damned. It made the score worse than it was, but this offense is just so putrid. It's even more putrid than it should be with this quarterback in there, because the whole point of keeping him in there is that he's had 4 years of being in the same system, and it looks like he was just brand new to the system.
So Robert Cahonen, he's sounding off in the Cincy Jungle Facebook page, and thank you very much for that. I just want to we'll talk, I guess, about the Dalton and bringing another quarterback in and all that kind of stuff, because a lot of people are talking about that. But let T overpower to high point the ball and let Chase get open deep. We talked about how we think that the Bengals will play a little bit more controlled type of offense on with Jake Browning under center, and then maybe throw those 50-50 balls to T. Higgins. On Sunday, there was an opportunity where he did throw a one-on-one ball to T. Higgins. I believe it was Rodgers again, who tipped it away. It was one of those where you go, man, okay, here it is. Here's that ball to get him close to. And so all of the fortunate bounces, the fortunate ebbs and flows of the games that got them to 2-0. This was that play to me was kind of a little bit symbolic of not only the entire day, but kind of they're just not getting the breaks. They're not making the plays. They're not doing the things that they need to do to win under Jake Browning. Now, that's not an indictment of T. Higgins at all. That cornerback made a great play. He got his hand in there right away, so that it was a tipped away ball. But those are the types of plays that we saw in 23 against this very Vikings team, not that cornerback specifically, but we saw T go off on that game on those 50-50 balls. And so that was kind of a little bit of a microcosm of the game where it's like, yeah, this just isn't going well. Now, the question is, does that, again, what we're talking about in this topic here, does that point to now those fortunate bounces are not going to go their way as much as they did the first 1.5 games under Burrow? Or again, is this just kind of a little weird thing and a young cornerback had just the game of the game of his life, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I all the credit in the world to Isaiah Rodgers, who, like you said, had I know he's never going to have a better game than that, right? And he took advantage of the opportunities there, and he made the plays that he needed to make. Even the first Jake Browning interception, like Harrison Smith, it was his debut game of the season. He barely gets a hand on it, and the ball just ricochets right to Isaiah Rodgers, who then gets the pick six, right? So I think when you talk about the ball bouncing your way and not like again, like those are unsustainable things that you just can't rely on a week to week basis, which is why I think if we're talking about emerging trends, in the first 2 weeks, this wasn't a good offense. Like they got a little jump spark when Jake Browning was throwing up 50-50 balls against the Jags, and that led to a couple touchdowns here and there. But when Burrow was in there, it was still an offense that was severely lacking any consistency, and they were still trying to find themselves. And it looked like an even worse version out there because obviously Joe Burrow is significantly better than Jake Browning. And I think most of the country saw that as well, right? So that is the main worry right now. The defense is going to be opportunistic. They're going to have decent weeks rushing the passer. When they can't rush the passer particularly well, it's going to be more challenging for the defense. But it's on the offense right now to look competent, to look like they're actually being coached. It doesn't look like that right now. And that's the biggest concern. Regardless of Browning's gunslinging mentality and the mistakes he's inevitably going to make, can they find any sense of consistency? Can they generate any movement up front? Because, I don't have a lot of optimism in that regard. And that's why it may not be 30-point losses every week, but until they see notable improvement there, it's hard to see a lot of wins.
So I engaged in a discussion last week about, there were some Bengal fans apparently on X that were saying time to play the young guys now that Burrow's hurt. And I don't know that there were specific names being mentioned. And you kind of said, well, maybe some more Mitchell Tinsley, maybe you mix in some Taj Brooks as a bigger back. And then they've got some young guys on defense that they've been getting some snaps to. And Logan Wilson's snaps dropped this week as well. Maybe that was also because the score was what it was at some point, but Barrett Carter got out there a little bit more. And of course, Demetrius Knight is getting some snaps too. But, in terms of young guys, the only other guys you can really think of, Jalen Rivers, Matt Lee, right? Especially if we're talking about issues along the interior of the offensive line. Of course, Miles Murphy now pressed into action because Shamar Stewart was injured last week. And of course, Shamar Stewart did get some time in those first two games, another young guy. So, I don't know. My response then before this game, I'm like, they're 2-0. Like, let's just kind of see what happens. But when you get your doors blown off you and what you see on some of these elements of tape and the lack of run game and all of that kind of things, do you have any pause, like not necessarily this week, but maybe in the coming weeks, if this trend continues, that, hey, we may need to give it a look at whether it's on the offensive line, whether it's if Miles Murphy continues to play, he was energetic and made a lot of plays, or a couple nice plays this last week. Chris Jenkins as well. I mean, do you then say, maybe it is time to give some of these guys a little bit more snaps based on, even if it was a game in a blowout, do we start doing that? I don't know. Going into this week, I was like, no, they're 2-0. Let's just keep writing it. But then the floodgates open, and now no option should be off the table, I guess, at this point.
I mean, yeah, like they can only do something from a quarterback standpoint, like getting someone else from outside of the building. I just don't.
Well, of course, that's the other position. Right. Yeah, of course, that's the other one. Yeah.
Like in terms of outside of that, it's just the offensive line that I'm looking at, and man, it's tough because Ted Karras is a wonderful person, but he looks every bit of 32 years old right now. He's not getting any movement. He is typically very reliable in pass protection, and that's not the case right now either. So you just have to just accept it that he's not playing well, and you have a much younger and much more athletic backup in Matt Lee right now who can actually execute a lot of the concepts that would probably benefit this offensive line. So that's a conversation that you need to have probably starting next week if it still looks like this. And you're not necessarily losing the chemistry there because, newsflash, you get the backup quarterback in there. Right.
There is none, yeah.
So that's honestly a very good topic to discuss, if not this week, then at the very least next, if nothing necessarily has changed. I think Dalton Reisner's calf injury, who, by the way, he was one of the handful of guys that was injured in this game, it doesn't appear to be serious, but if you want to get a look at Jalen Rivers to see if he can provide some sort of a pop there, Reisner hasn't necessarily done anything that warrants keeping him in the lineup, no questions asked, right? You still want to give Fairchild more chances to develop. He's still young, so I'm okay with writing him out. And you're obviously going to downgrade if you move on from the tackles at this point to Cody Ford. So yeah, you're looking at Karras, you're looking at Reisner as guys that you can potentially look at. So you drafted these guys, albeit pretty late, but there's promise to them and their skill sets. And yeah, it's a conversation to be had, if not this week, starting next week for sure.
Yeah, and it's tough because again, Karras is an awesome guy and he has been a good player for the Bengals, and he's not the only guy that's, again, there were very, very few players on this team that should be immune from, I guess, constructive criticism this week after it's a historic loss. It's the worst score, at least in terms of score. It is the worst loss in Bengals history, and that floors me. Even with a backup quarterback, because you are going up against another backup quarterback, even though he was a number 2 overall pick at one point in the draft, but that was ages ago. And Carson Wentz hasn't been any kind of a regular starter for 4 years. I think it was, 2021, where he was starting an immense amount of games. He was kind of more of a spot starter the last handful of years. He wasn't perfect, but he, especially on that opening drive, he looked pretty comfortable. And, I don't know. I know some people are in our live chat are calling for, Andy Dalton. And it's like that. To me, I don't want to talk. I don't want to talk a lot about Andy Dalton. I have a lot of respect for Andy Dalton for what he did in Cincinnati. I have a lot of respect for him as a human being and everything. I don't want to say bridges burned, but I don't think that one's happening. There's some talk about other people are, I posted a news dump article on Cincy Jungle. There's some major outlets saying the Bengals should think about Cousins. Well, the Falcons now have had some issues with Michael Penix, and so are they going to make a change back? And so now Kirk Cousins may not even be on the table. We'll see what happens there, but I mean, there may be. There's also, I guess, Jameis Winston is another name that may be kicked around a little bit. That offense is struggling as well under Russell Wilson. Who knows what's going to happen going forward there? So the options, at least from veteran guys to trade for, might be limited for a variety of factors. And for the Dalton people, for me, and we could sit here a week from now and look like complete dummies, or I could look like a complete dummy for saying this. I just don't think, based on how things played out, that Andy Dalton will be coming back to the Bengals in a trade scenario. I just don't think that's going to happen. But that may be just me.
I didn't even hear about that until I saw some people in our live chat talk about it.
Well, we got a lot of people talking about it. Yeah, we got a lot of people talking about it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't see it. I still think that they view Browning as the best backup that they can probably find, and any other alternative solution is going to cost more than they're probably comfortable with. And that is the story of the Bengals in a nutshell.
The devil, that's what they stick to. And look, Jake Browning, I say that tongue in cheek, but Jake Browning has had a productive stint of starts with the Bengals. But the fact of the matter is he is responsible of 5 of 8 turnovers over the last 6 quarters. And the Bengals have 8 overall in that span. And they are 2-1, so it's not doom and gloom. They've got, some wiggle room and breathing room. They have some tough games coming up. They've got Denver, they've got Detroit, they've got Green Bay. They've got a lot of tough teams coming down the stretch here. They do get a little bit of some wiggle room in the middle there to maybe keep things afloat and that sort of thing. And then things get tough again towards November, December. So we will see what happens. This is again a slow moving franchise in terms of major moves, player trades, that sort of thing. But if Zach Taylor is feeling the pressure, and if he does have ownership's ears, and if the struggles on offense continue, particularly at quarterback, who knows? Maybe he can make something happen. We will see. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network. We're going to be here for a little while longer, I guess, talking about this whatever we watched on Sunday. But go get the Believe in Cincy, BLEAV in CINCY podcast channel through your favorite audio streamer. You can get 4 different shows on that channel. And of course, if you like what we do on YouTube, you can subscribe there. There's a show link and all kinds of stuff. Give us a thumbs up, all that kind of stuff. But we appreciate that. And of course, for your Bengals news, opinions, analysis, keep it to cincyjungle.com. And if you check out my guy's lid that he's got on there, John at A to Z Sports, go check out him. And John, you are on ESPN Radio in Cincinnati on Thursdays or Fridays?
Cincy 360 with Austin Elmore and Tony Pike, Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern.
Look at you.
There
Just surrounded by stars. Surrounded by the stars. Look at you. All right. Well, I don't even know where we're going to really go with this. But this is kind of, unfortunately, quarterback and head coach, even though there are a lot of different elements in terms of execution and play call, there's all kinds of different things that go into a win or a loss in the NFL, in football in general. I was kind of thinking about this, John. And I like Zach Taylor a lot in a lot of different respects. I like him as a human. I like him as a leader. I like what he's about. I like the, hey, we're going to build a good culture in the locker room. And for the vast majority of his Bengals career, he has done so. The Bengals have seen some of their highest levels of success and somewhat sustained success in his tenure. One thing that stuck out to me, now I didn't watch all of Sunday's presser. I did watch I watched a little bit of it, and then I watched a little bit of a bit of the one on Monday as well. I'm not the fire and brimstone, cuss everybody out, and all that kind of stuff, and point people out. You did this wrong. I don't think that's a good sign of a leader, and that's what I do respect about Zach. However, I just felt that this was maybe a moment to show a little bit of a different and more emotional side of Zach Taylor than what we have seen so many times and what we maybe saw over those 2 pressers. Now, press conferences are a lot of coach speak, a lot of player speak. I mean, we know that. But for me, you're coming off a historic loss, absolutely embarrassing 5 turnovers. I know it's a transition week, so I do give him actually quite a bit of a pass. It's a tough week to go from franchise quarterback to your backup quarterback, albeit a talented one. Tweak the offense in a matter of days, that sort of thing. You're going up against a very good defense. You're on the road. So I give him a big pass. But for me, I look at what we talked about earlier, the lack of preparation, or I don't know if preparation is the right, but focus in this game, whether it was jitters, whether it was minds or elsewhere, but the uncharacteristic fumbles from players that normally don't do that, and other plays where you just like I said, the avalanche of stuff that just came down, you go, this is just horrible. I don't know, man. I guess I just would have liked to have seen, and there was an element on Sunday where Zach was talking really fast, and I think that's his aggravation mode, right? Like that's his way of being, aggravated. We do see him aggravated on the sideline, particularly with questionable calls and that sort of thing. I guess I was just kind of looking maybe for a little bit of a Marvin Lewis be an effing pro type of moment. Not necessarily that crazy, but something where the players go, whoa, that's a side of Zach I haven't seen. We gotta start reining this thing in, because Joe isn't walking through that door healthy anytime soon. So what's that?
He's scooting through that door.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess I just would have been like, unacceptable. I don't know. I just a little bit more hard nosed. That's not his personality, and I get that, and I do respect a lot of his leadership style. But me personally, I just felt like historic loss. I don't know. This is just plain not telling us, hey, you can't commit 5 turnovers and expect to win the game. Of course you can't. But the point is this is unacceptable. This performance was unacceptable from me as the head coach, from our offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator, down the line, players executing. It's unacceptable. And so that's just me. I may be out on an island on that. But again, I say that with having a lot of respect for Zach Taylor overall.
Yeah. We didn't see what we didn't see what he said. Sorry, we didn't see what he said in the locker room. The thing is that we know how he talks and how he talks to his players, so we can assume that there wasn't a BNFing pro moment in the locker room. At this point, I don't really care what he has to say to the media or to the players because, personal anecdote, I'm pissed off at Wes Miller, the Bearcats head basketball coach, because he consistently takes blame for all their shortcomings. And at some point, you're just sick of it. Like, just do better. Just coach better.
Do something different.
That's where I'm at with Zach. And it's an interesting relationship because, again, like I think like a lot of people, I happen to think that he's a good manager of players. He's a good intermediary for this franchise specifically. And there's some positives to that. I think that the biggest thing that he can do to prove himself as worthy of continuing to coach this team is to replicate or to build off of what he did the last time he was in this situation when he and Dan Pitcher formulated a plan on how to get the offense back on track with the backup quarterback. And this was the absolute worst way to start that because it looked like they were completely outcoached or they just weren't coached at all. And that's the biggest indictment on Zach. Everything about him is like he's propped up by having an elite quarterback, and it's hard to disagree with that a lot of the time, which is why I try to give him the benefit of the doubt because he obviously has influence on what the offense does, regardless of Burrow doing magic and making chicken soup out of chicken, you know what. If this continues to the point where the offense turnovers be damned, if they continue to look incompetent, like it's not. I don't know if it's the final straw, but it's like at some point you just are who you are. And I just don't think he has the resume, specifically with building a run game, which is crazy considering he comes from the Shanahan tree. When it's all said and done, like he should have a better knowledge on how to build that phase of the offense. So it for me, like personally, it just doesn't really matter how upset that he gets. I think I agree in the sense that like you would like to see something different in terms of to spark something, which I think was the point that you're making, but the results have to matter here. And I've been adamant saying that like I don't know, I'm not confident saying that his seat is actually hot for the season, considering he's going to get paid next year. But if players continue to check out of games and they continue to be lopsided like this, you can't ignore the fact that the one thing that he had left, which was the support of the players, is probably leaving at that point. We're not there yet, but this is the starting point of that potential road.
Look, and what I said also, I don't know that is, again, ingrained in Zach's DNA about leadership style or, going after people or whatever. And that's not even really what I'm saying. I just, and maybe I'm completely just talking out of my ass where maybe this isn't the time for that. You are 2-1. And maybe they all feel that this was just a complete blip in the radar and let's not hit the panic button. But it's just very difficult to look at the run game the first 3 weeks, to look at the transition to a backup quarterback and to see 8 turnovers in 6 quarters and not go, okay, how are we changing? What are we doing? And I'm not short leash guy either in terms of players. We talked about, some of the other guys that maybe aren't playing so well at this point in time. And is it time for some of those young guys to get some more snaps, that sort of thing? I'm not short leash guy either, particularly with veterans that you've trusted for a long time. But this is a very slow moving franchise, and that trickles down to the coaching staff. And I don't know that certain changes will be made. And again, this is one game, but you have as I mentioned, you have tough games coming down the pike here, particularly against some NFC North, other NFC North teams, and AFC team coming up here. This week's a big one because it is a conference game. You need to start racking those kinds of wins up as well, aside from division wins. I guess I just look at this and I go, how is this team that, and granted, the Jags might be pretty good this year, all said and done. We don't know. But how is this team really going to compete against the Baltimore Ravens later in the year twice? How is this team and what they are doing or not doing on the field going to compete against the Buffalo Bills later this year? How is this team going to compete against even the Pittsburgh Steelers, who some people are thinking, where are they at right now? They're a little Jekyll and Hyde. They do have Aaron Rodgers. I believe they won this Sunday, right? So what are the Bengals going to do against some of those teams that they will need to beat if all of these people have so much faith in Jake Browning keeping the ship afloat and Zach Taylor keeping this ship afloat? If and when Burrow even returns this year, how is this team, as it is currently performing, going to even compete against those teams?
It needs top to bottom high quality coaching. And right now, I don't think anyone can have confidence in that. I think Al Golden still has a lot to prove on his side of the ball. And I think there have been signs of promise in that regard. But he was supposed to be the guy that was under the most pressure to get the most out of his players. Now that pressure is back to Zach. And again, I'm not completely waving the white flag and saying this is hopeless, because we have seen it before. And I do think he and Dan Pitcher deserve credit for what they did with to get Browning to this position where he was 2 years ago. We need to see it. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't have to be 38-point losses, but if they continue to look inept, both in pass protection and run blocking and running the ball and getting Browning comfortable and not generating easy yards with the playmakers that they have, if they can't do that, it all falls on him, which is why I think some people have said that, because Burrow is hurt, Zach just gets a free pass.
Free pass. Yep.
This is when he needs to show his value as not only the head coach, but the head guy in terms of running the offense, coordinating the offense. This is when he needs to prove his stuff. And again, I don't think that the front office is going to look that way, but it's how I'm going to look at it. And as someone who has tried to give people the context of why you can't always blame the head coach, this is me saying that it all falls on him now. It's not fair that his quarterback got hurt yet again, but this is the situation that he is. Prove your mettle.
I completely agree with you. And you could also argue that right now Browning has a better offense on paper than he did 2 years ago. There was no Gesicki. There was no Noah Fant. I know Fant fumbled last week, but Fant also scored a touchdown in the opening week, and he's been a solid player aside from that one play. I know there's no Joe Mixon, but you do have other weapons. You supposedly have an improved offensive line player to player from that unit, and it's just nothing seems to be cohesive. And I know it's hard to be cohesive when your starting quarterback goes out halfway through week 2. I understand that. But like you said, if the Bengals are able, and if Zach Taylor, Dan Pitcher, and others are able to recreate or do something very similar or somewhat similar to that system and be successful, then you say, hey, Zach, once again, like we did back in 23, that's a tough job. Good job. You were right there towards the end of the year, and backup quarterback, that's not an easy task. But I think, and maybe we all held a little bit of false hope because of what Browning did in that situation, that we just thought, he's going to go in against another 2-0 team in the Minnesota Vikings, and he's going to go on the road, and he's going to keep it close. Maybe they squeak out a win, that sort of. Maybe we just held out false hope in a transition week that is just unrealistic. But at the same time, a historic loss is a historic loss. I mean, that's just kind of what it is. And the Bengals were completely dominated in almost, if not every single facet of this game. And now, I think the discussion has to be had. And it's not about Zach Taylor's future as the head coach necessarily, but like you said, if this thing continues to tumble downhill. And if the Bengals have a 6-win season, yeah, there's the, oh, well, no Joe Burrow argument, of course. But at the same time, if you can't show a semblance of your team being competitive under a backup quarterback, being in the hunt, beating some quality teams, and not making 5 errors, I don't even know. I mean, I guess you can call them forced errors, but some of that is unforced errors as well. It's just, 5 errors a game, regardless. You have to have some sort of discussion about the coaching, the head coach, and coaches under him as well. Because here's the other thing, John. The whole offseason, the whole 2025 offseason for the Bengals was about re-signing their star players, of course. But it was about, okay, Zach's not the scapegoat. It's the assistants that are the scapegoats. And so that is where they purged a lot of assistants. So now you bring in these new assistants. And if this thing continues to spiral down out of control, you made the changes that you thought on the coaching staff was going to make the difference. And I know the quarterback situation is what it is, but at some point the spotlight does have to shine where it shines.
Spotlight is shining directly on him. And that's why, I mean, you cannot underestimate and underemphasize how important these next, I guess, technically 7 days are in terms of just responding to this. This team has typically performed above expectation when they're counted out, specifically on the national stage. They're going into an extremely hostile environment in Denver, who's reeling off of an unfortunate loss to a divisional rival in the Chargers. What kind of statement can they make? It's completely up to Taylor and the coaching staff to get this team at least in the right state of mind to just be competitive, just to respond at least somewhat. Even if they don't win, the season is far from over at that point, but to show any signs of life, any signs of improvement after getting punched in the mouth, the gut, the genital area, the shin, every part of their body was hit. How do you respond? It's completely up to the coaches and to get the players in the right mindset. So that's what we need to discuss.
And look, some of those teams, the Chiefs, they're 1-2, and we've seen 2 games of 3 where Travis Kelce and Andy Reid are going at it on the sideline. The Giants thought they'd be in a better place. They're 0-3. They've got all kinds of question marks. And then, we've seen Bo Nix and Sean Payton yelling at each other on the sideline as well. So it's not all, roses and sunshine for every other team out there right now. Again, this isn't a panic button type of show. I don't really like to do that. The Bengals are 2-1. They're in a good spot overall, but this game was just highly, highly concerning in so many facets. And it's not just the overall score. It's the X's and O's that we pointed out. It's individual players. It's units as a whole. So it's scheme. It's everything that really, really came to the forefront in this one. So, concern is legitimate. The Bengals are not out of it by any stretch of the imagination. I think we have Detroit and Baltimore playing tonight, and I think someone said they're tied currently as we are taking the air live on Monday night. And we usually don't like to go overlap Monday Night Football, particularly when the Ravens are playing, but that's just how it is. So let's close up shop, John Sheeran, and I guess mic drop for this one. What do you got for this one?
Again, the Bengals are 2-1, and I've had to answer to 2 of my coworkers about a potential Trey Hendrickson trade. So again, you never know how these seasons are going to go.
You never know how and they could squeak out some wins against teams that we think are very formidable, and they, end up surprising us. A long way to go, and they are ahead of their past curve in September, so at least under Zach Taylor. So we gotta at least applaud him for that. And a tough look. It's not an enviable position for Zach Taylor. Obviously, losing Joe Burrow again. What is that? 3 times in his 7 seasons as Bengals head coach for the year. So not an enviable position by any stretch of the imagination. Excuse me. Just want to shout out my late father-in-law, Rocky Moran. It's about a year from his anniversary of his passing. If you went back a year ago. Just an awesome gentleman, and we spent some time with some family this weekend to celebrate him and do it hopefully in a way that he would be stoked about. So just want to shout out him again, a true renaissance man of his time, a pilot, an IndyCar racer, raced in the Indy 500, I think 3 times. Cool dude. And we miss him, but he's in a better place and hopefully watching over all of us. So just want to give him a little shout out on this episode of the Orange or Black Insider.
You're a pretty cool dude as well. So it's good to have someone carry on a legacy like that, like yourself.
Look at you. I don't hold a candle to that guy, but I appreciate you, John. You're a good man yourself as well. Thank you to all of you who tuned in live. Thank you for listening after the fact on a number of different platforms. As I mentioned, believe in Cincy, the podcast channel. This is the Orange or Black Insider presented by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Hey, I would maybe place some bets, not necessarily maybe Bengals win, but maybe cover the spread. I think the spread, what'd you say, John, at the opening?
7.5
7 points. Yeah. So maybe they cover the spread this week at least. We'll talk more about that when we preview this game. We may have a special guest. We're working on that one. Also, this show is brought to you by FOCO, the fans only company. Go to foco.com and the link in our bio to get some exclusive Bengals merch. They've got some cool bobbleheads that are exclusive to foco.com. And we appreciate the support of both of those great organizations. John, you're the man. It's been a tough episode to get through in a number of different ways, but a lot of fun. We've got a lot of viewers. Appreciate that, and appreciate you, my friend.
Appreciate you guys as well.